Hello, everybody. Welcome to Steve's View. You know, when people talk about American politics being messy, one of the things that always comes up is gerrymandering. That word sounds kind of funny, almost like a cartoon character, but the reality is anything but funny. Gerrymandering is basically when politicians draw election maps in a way that helps their own party win more seats, even if the voters themselves are pretty evenly split. It's been around forever. And honestly, it's one of the oldest tricks in the political playbook. But here's the kicker. What's happening right now in California could turn this old political headache into a full-blown national crisis. So let's break it down. Every 10 years after the U.S. Census, states have to redraw their congressional districts. The idea is simple. The population changes, so the map has to change too, to make sure each district has roughly the same number of people. Sounds fair, right? Well, here's where it gets messy. Whoever's in charge of drawing those maps has the power to tilt the playing field. You can take a group of voters, split them up into different districts to dilute their influence, or cram them all together into one district so they only get one representative instead of 2 or 3. It's like cheating in plain sight, but it's legal because, technically, the Constitution leaves the map drawing to the states. Now, California used to be the model of how to avoid this problem. Back in 2008, voters there said, enough of politicians drawing their own maps. They passed a ballot measure creating an independent citizens commission to handle redistricting. The whole idea was to take power away from partisan lawmakers and make the process more neutral. And honestly, for years, people around the country pointed to California as a kind of gold standard. They'd say, hey, if California can do this, maybe we can too. But here's the bombshell. Governor Gavin Newsom is pushing to get rid of that independent commission. That's right. He wants to scrap the very reform that made California stand out and put the power back in the hands of the state legislature. And the timing is no accident. Democrats in California are looking at what Republicans in places like Texas have done with their maps. And they're basically saying, if they're going to play hardball, so are we. And you know what? From a pure political strategy standpoint, you can kind of see the logic. Texas Republicans have used their control over redistricting to squeeze Democrats out of competitive districts. As a result, Democrats lost seats they might have otherwise held. And in a razor-thin House of Representatives, every single seat matters. So now Newsom and California Democrats are saying, why should we tie our own hands while the other side doesn't? It's a tit for tat, eye for an eye situation. But here's the problem. If California does this, it's not going to stop there. Other blue states, New York, Illinois, Maryland, they'll follow suit. And then red states like Florida, Georgia, Ohio, they'll double down too. What you end up with is this national arms race where both parties keep redrawing maps in the most extreme way possible. It's like a never-ending chess match, but instead of clever strategy, it's just blatant power grabs. And the consequences are way beyond just one state. If every state is playing this game, then the House of Representatives becomes less about what the voters actually want and more about which party controls the map-making process. Voters could split 50-50 nationwide, but because of how the lines are drawn, one party could end up with a comfortable majority. That's not democracy. That's engineering the outcome. Now, let's zoom out for a second. Why does this matter so much? Well, in the bigger picture, it's about trust. Americans already don't trust politicians. Surveys show people feel like the system is rigged. Gerrymandering just reinforces that. Imagine going to vote, but deep down knowing that no matter what you do, the outcome's already baked into the map. That's how a lot of folks feel in heavily gerrymandered districts. And when people feel like their vote doesn't matter, they disengage. They stop voting. They stop caring. And that, in the long run, is poison for democracy. Now, the original reform in California was supposed to counter that. It was about saying, look, we can do better. We can take politicians out of the process and let independent citizens decide. And for a while, it worked. But if California backtracks now, it sends a signal to the rest of the country that even the so-called reformers can't resist the lure of power. That's why this is such a big deal. It's not just about California. It's about whether reform is even possible in today's political climate. The argument Newsom and his allies are making is basically, hey, the other side started it. Why should we play fair when they don't? And sure, that might make sense in the short term, especially if you're trying to win back a few House seats. But long term, it sets off a cycle of escalation. It's like the Cold War of American politics. Mutually assured destruction, but with voting maps. And here's where it gets really interesting. Some people argue that this fight over maps is just the latest chapter in a much deeper problem, the complete breakdown of cooperation between Democrats and Republicans. The two parties aren't just competing anymore. They're locked in a kind of existential battle. It's less about policies and more about survival. Each side sees the other not as an opponent, but as a threat to the country itself. And when that's the mindset, compromise goes out the window. Everything becomes about winning at all costs. That's why some commentators, including some well-known indie media channels, argue that this can only end when one side completely dominates. That sounds dramatic, but think about it. If both sides are constantly trying to outmaneuver each other with tactics like gerrymandering, there's no natural stopping point. The only way it ends is if one party becomes so dominant that the other can't fight back. But here's the reality. America's too divided for that to happen anytime soon. The red states are getting redder, the blue states are getting bluer, and the swing states are shrinking. So what we're really looking at is an endless tug of war. Now, do I think gerrymandering is going to destroy American democracy? Probably not by itself, but it's part of a bigger erosion. It chips away at legitimacy, at fairness, at the sense that we're all playing by the same rules. And every time one state ramps it up, others feel like they have to respond in kind. That's what makes California's move so dangerous. It could normalize the very thing it once stood against. So where does that leave us? Honestly, at a crossroads. On one hand, you've got the cold, hard political reality. If you don't gerrymander, you might lose power, and then you can't advance any of your agenda. On the other hand, you've got the principle. Democracy only works if voters actually choose their representatives, not the other way around. And right now, those two things are colliding. What's especially ironic here is that California has branded itself as this progressive, reform-minded state that leads the way on making democracy fairer. If they scrap their independent commission just to score a few seats, it could blow back on them reputationally. Voters might start asking, wait a minute, are you really about reform, or are you just as cynical as everyone else? And once that perception sets in, it's hard to shake. Meanwhile, the bigger picture for the country is clear. This isn't just about California. This is about the future of how America runs its elections. If every state goes back to partisan map drawing, then the next decade of politics is going to be even more polarized, even more bitter, and even more detached from what voters actually want. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real story here. Gerrymandering isn't just about maps. It's a reflection of how far apart we've drifted as a country, and how unwilling either side is to give an inch. So yeah, this is a big story. It's not just a political nerd issue. It cuts right to the heart of whether democracy in America can function in good faith. And while it's true that gerrymandering has been around since the early 1800s, literally since a guy named Elbridge Gerry signed off on a salamander-shaped district in Massachusetts, what makes this moment different is the scale and the stakes. We're not just talking about one funny-looking district anymore. We're talking about entire states engineering outcomes in a way that could tip control of Congress. And with the 2026 midterms coming up, and of course, the 2028 presidential race after that, these decisions being made right now could shape who has power for years to come. That's why California's move isn't just some local news story. It's potentially the opening shot in a national battle that's going to define the next decade of American politics. So, the question is, do we want a democracy where politicians choose their voters, or where voters choose their politicians? California voters already answered that once back in 2008. Now it looks like they might have to answer it again, and this time, the stakes are even higher. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.